At San Francisco International Airport, 4 aircraft full of passengers were waiting to take off in the dark of the night. Then they noticed that one of the aircraft was moving towards them quickly to land. He asked for landing permission from ATC and ATC gave him permission. First, the pilots of the 4 aircraft thought that this was their misunderstanding. He would come closer and align himself with the empty runway, but it was not what they were thinking. The landing aircraft was about to come and crash into them. Welcome back to our new video. This is not a very old incident. On July 7, 2017, Air Canada's aircraft took off with 135 passengers and 5 crew members from the Toronto Pearson International Airport. This was a routine flight that had to land at San Francisco International Airport in 5 hours and 30 minutes. Both pilots were experienced and had landed at San Francisco Airport many times before. But today was not normal for them, and this was going to be an example for the aviation industry in the coming time. The whole journey went well, and when Air Canada 759 reached San Francisco, they started making their landing positions. For this purpose, they started waiting for the permission of the air traffic control tower. San Francisco Airport has a total of 4 runways, but at a time, only 2 can be operated. If the wind comes from the south, then these 2 runways are opened for landing and takeoff. And if the wind comes from the west, then these 2 runways are used. We all know that planes are made to take off or land against the wind. Today the wind was coming from the west. To land the plane against the wind, one of these runways had to be used. The names of these runways are 28L and 28R. That means 28 left and right. So far, everything that was normal has started to deteriorate. Runway 28L was closed for maintenance, and that is why its lights were off. The control tower gave Air Canada 759 the permission to land on the 7th runway 28R. Because both the pilots had already landed on this airport many times before, they were expecting to see 2 parallel lights at the runway. One of them had to land on the right runway, and this was the first mistake they made. There are 2 taxiways on the sides of these 2 runways, which are green in color. After loading the passengers from the terminal, the plane comes to the runway through these taxiways. But because of the darkness of the night, Air Canada 759's pilots thought the taxiway lights to be 28R, and they thought the actual 28R lights to be 28L. But the biggest threat was still unknown to the pilots. Yes, 4 fully loaded aircraft were waiting for takeoff on the right taxiway. 3 were United Airlines and 1 was a Philippine Airlines. There were more than 1,000 passengers in all 4 of them, and the fuel was fully loaded. The runway is only 100 meters between the 28R and the taxiway. When Air Canada 759 aligned itself with the taxiway, it was difficult to figure out where it was actually going to land. Now the biggest question is that it is normal for the runway to be closed for maintenance. So why was this not told to the Air Canada 759 pilots? Because if they had known about this confusion would not have occurred. The information about the runway 28L being closed was mentioned in the NOTAMs. NOTAMs, or Notices to Air Missions, such notices in which all the information from takeoff to landing is written in lines. And in reality, it is not so easy to point out important notices from these. This is why the notice of the 28L being closed was missed by the pilots, and this was their second big mistake. Air Canada 759 was moving fastly towards the taxiway. The control tower gave them the permission to land from the visual approach, which means that they have to find the runway and line up the plane manually. Normally, when the weather is good, the visual approach is allowed, but because there have been such accidents many times before, pilots are unable to judge in the visual approach and land somewhere else. This is why most pilots also use the instrument guidance system during the visual approach. This instrument guidance system tells the pilots at the end of the run whether they are landing on the right runway or not. To activate this system, the runway number has to be added. By the way, modern aircrafts activate the guidance system themselves, but because this Airbus A320 had to manually activate the guidance system, which the pilots did not do for any reason, and this was the third big mistake of the pilots. But why were the pilots making one mistake after another? Actually, this was a big day for both the pilots. It was 11:45 p.m. and both of them did not take any rest from the last 19 hours. Both of them were Canadian pilots, and the fatigue rules of the Canadian pilots were not too strict compared to the US. We pointed out 3 mistakes of the Air Canada 759 pilots. But what about the 4 planes that were watching that Air Canada is not moving towards the runway but towards the taxiway, and still were not telling the control tower? Actually, everyone knew that the plane has to move a little more to the right during the visual approach at the San Francisco airport, because if the plane comes in a straight line of 28 hours, it will have to pass over the Foster City area of San Francisco. The pilots come closer to the runway to align themselves so that there is no noise pollution on the population. This was normal for the pilots of the 4 parked planes. Because of this, no one reported the control tower. But when Air Canada's plane came closer and did not align itself with 28 hours, then the Philippine Airlines plane turned on its landing lights carefully, so that the landing plane could see that there are already 4 planes standing here. The Air Canada 759 pilots could see some lights on the taxiway, which they considered to be 28 hours. Both the pilots did not feel anything right, so they immediately messaged the control tower. The control tower replied to them at the same time that there is no one on 28 hours and it is completely empty. You have permission to land. In fact, the control tower did not know that it was not going to land on 28 hours but on the taxiway. Normally, there is another controller for this situation, which monitors the traffic on the ground. But because it was that time of night when the traffic was not so much, only one controller was managing all this. Fortunately, the pilots standing in the waiting area were able to hear this conversation between Air Canada and the control tower. They also did not understand why Air Canada is not aligned with the runway even after getting so close. Now there were only a few seconds left. The pilots standing in the waiting area could see their death in front of them. They were confirmed that Air Canada is considering the taxiway to be the runway. The United One pilot, who was standing in the front, immediately messaged the control tower without telling his call sign. In response, the control tower immediately relayed a message to Air Canada to go around. While Air Canada received this message, it was only a few feet above the 3rd plane standing in the line. Fortunately, they reacted immediately and gained altitude again. If there was only 1 more second delay, it would have been the biggest accident in the history of aviation. 1,000 passengers were sitting in parked planes and 135 passengers were in Air Canada. Fuel was fully loaded in all these planes and it would have been difficult to control what would have happened next. After this incident, a full investigation was carried out, which proved that Air Canada's 759 pilots were at fault, because they did not activate the instrument guidance system and did not read the notes mentioned on the notepad. Apart from this, the National Transportation Safety Board has made new rules for San Francisco Airport, in which, when one runway is closed, the permission for the visual approach will not be given. Along with the air traffic in off-peak hours, ground traffic controllers have also been declared mandatory. I hope you will like and share this video. Thank you for your loving comments. See you in the next video.